They say every war starts with something small, but mine began with the sound of tires crunching across gravel at dawn and the sight of red and blue police lights flashing against the pine trees on my property. I had just poured my coffee when 2 sheriff cruisers pulled up by my grandfather's old cabin on Lake Serenity, Minnesota. The deputies stepped out, hands resting near their holsters, while a woman in a blinding pink bathrobe stood dramatically on the deck of the $800,000 mansion across the water, pointing at me like I was some fugitive. That was Brenda Carmichael Lauer, self-appointed HOA president, though no such HOA had ever legally existed here. She had been terrorizing neighbors for months with fake fines, threats, and rules she invented out of thin air. That morning, she'd gone too far. She called the sheriff, claiming I was trespassing on community property while fishing on my own dock. One of the deputies, clearly uncomfortable, started reading off the complaint, saying I had to vacate HOA-controlled land immediately. I pulled out the one thing that shut everyone up instantly: my deed. Bold letters, my family's name, no HOA listed anywhere. That piece of paper was my shield. The officers studied it, exchanged glances, and realized they had been played. Brenda's face dropped, her fake smugness evaporating into rage. I thought that would be the end of it. But I didn't know Brenda. She wasn't just a bad neighbor. She was a hurricane disguised as a suburban mom. And when the sheriff cars drove away, she shouted across the lake that I hadn't heard the last of her. She was right. I hadn't even seen the beginning. Asterisk it. All started when I moved back after inheriting my grandfather's lakeside cabin. I'd spent 20 years in military logistics, 3 tours overseas, and a brutal divorce that left me drained. So the cabin felt like salvation. Lake Serenity had always been a slice of Heaven 47 scattered properties, locals and summer families, all bound by one unspoken law: wave when you see each other, help when needed, and otherwise mind your own damn business. That was until Brenda bought the gaudy McMansion that stuck out like a sore thumb against the wilderness. Within a week, she was on a pontoon boat, clipboard in hand, introducing herself as president of the Lake Serenity Homeowners Association. My first thought was, HOA. What HOA? My deed was clean, and everyone I spoke to laughed off her claims. But she didn't stop. She sent official letters stamped with fake seals, demanding that I remove my aluminum fishing boat, repaint the cabin, and pay fines for aesthetic violations. She even taped a notice to my front door with red lettering screaming, $500 HOA fine due immediately. It would have been laughable if not for her persistence. Soon, half the lake was intimidated. Elderly neighbors wrote her checks. Young families tried to keep their heads down. She bullied them with threats of liens, lawsuits, and property seizures, none of which she had the authority to enforce. Me, I wasn't about to bow down to a suburban tyrant with a power complex. That was when she escalated calls to county officials, phony police reports, even bribes to local clerks. She wanted me off my own land. But the fatal mistake Brenda made was forgetting one simple fact. The very mansion she lorded over wasn't even hers. She was just a tenant, and her landlord, the man she was declaring war on, was me. Asterisk. I'll never forget the day I revealed it.
Ow.
Brenda stormed into my yard with a sheriff's deputy in tow, clutching another thick manila folder like she was presenting evidence in a federal trial. She declared I owed her association $10,000 in unpaid fines and threatened to sue if I didn't pay within 10 days. The deputy looked uneasy, clearly aware she was overstepping, but bound to follow through with the complaint. I let her rant, let her puff herself up in front of him, let her throw every fake regulation in my face. Then I walked calmly to my cabin, grabbed a binder, and returned with the one document that made her jaw lock tighter than steel: the lease agreement for her mansion. My name right there in black ink, as the landlord of the very estate she was renting. Her eyes darted between the deputy, the lease, and me, her face going pale like all the oxygen had just left her body. The deputy couldn't hold back a chuckle. "Ma'am, looks like you've been paying rent to the man you've been trying to evict." For the first time, Brenda didn't have a snappy comeback. Her lips quivered, her hands clenched that manila folder like she could strangle it into rewriting reality. I told her, in front of the law, that if she didn't back off every neighbor she'd scammed, I'd file for immediate eviction. It wasn't an empty threat. I had already spoken with my attorney. Brenda's empire of intimidation crumbled right there in the dirt driveway of my grandfather's cabin. And yet she still tried to save face, snarling that she would fight this all the way to the Supreme Court before storming off to her rental mansion. The deputy just shook his head and muttered, "Never seen anything like that before." Neither had I, but something told me Brenda wasn't finished, not yet. Asterisk, the fallout was nothing short of explosive. Word spread around Lake Serenity faster than a wildfire that Brenda, self-proclaimed HOA president, had no legal power, and was, in fact, a renter under the very man she tried to destroy. Neighbors who had been quietly suffering under her threats finally stood tall. Some demanded refunds of the fines they'd paid, others reported her to the county for harassment and fraud. Within weeks, her fabricated HOA was dead in the water, and her reputation was shredded beyond repair. I filed formal eviction papers not because I wanted to kick her out immediately, but because it was the only way to finally hold her accountable. She fought tooth and nail, showing up to court in designer suits, waving her folders of fake rules, trying to spin herself as the victim of a cruel landlord. But the judge took one look at the lease, one look at the forged HOA documents, and practically laughed her out of the courtroom. She was ordered to vacate within 30 days. The last time I saw Brenda was through the trees as movers loaded her furniture into trucks, her pink bathrobe flapping in the wind as she barked at them to handle everything with respect. The mansion windows, once glowing like predators' eyes across the lake, now looked hollow, empty, defeated. Lake Serenity, for the first time in years, felt peaceful again. The neighbors came by with pies, beers, and handshakes, thanking me for standing up when they couldn't. I didn't feel like a hero, just a man protecting the place that had given him peace after decades of chaos. And as the sun set over the glassy water, loons calling across the shoreline, I realized Brenda had been right about one thing. I hadn't seen the last of her, because people like her don't disappear. They resurface somewhere, somehow. If she ever comes back to Lake Serenity, she'll remember the day she called the sheriff on her landlord and lost everything.